Welcome to the Mad Singers Management Podcast from madsingers.com, where entrepreneurs and business managers learn and share. If you like the show, don't forget to leave a review.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Today I have with me Adam Sinkus. Welcome to the show, Adam.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate you having me on today.
Awesome. Adam, not everyone in the world knows you. Who are you and what are you all about?
So my name's Adam Sinkus. I am a leadership and culture consultant here in Southwest Florida. But my big focuses are helping small businesses with small business strategy, really giving them the tools that they need to build and grow. But on the same token, as they grow, continuing to stay engaged with them and show their new leaders and their new structure how they can drive that still that same kind of culture that they had in their startup phase to really be successful.
Awesome. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Oh, it's a blast. It's every day is a new adventure.
I hope it's good adventures then.
Usually.
Excellent. Adam, whenever I talk to you, I always hear culture. What's that all about?
Yeah, so I think we've kind of changed the way we look at business, right? So over the last probably 70 years, there's always been the stigma of, well, I'm the boss, so we got to do it this way, right? And what I find with companies is, it really more so is with employees is, you'll get people that want to do the work because they need a paycheck, right? But they are only going to do that minimal amount of work just to get by, so to speak. So I've really stepped up and said, we got to step back and look at how leaders are really driving this culture to really engage people and make people want to come to work, make people really engaged in the tasks that they're doing and want to grow into new tasks. Because that's really what's going to set your business to propel forward. It's not, it's not the numbers. It's not the, it's not even customers, right? I mean, customers is a big part of it. But if you have a bunch of angry, upset employees that don't want to be there, don't want to work hard for you, you're not going to get new customers here. And more than likely, you're going to upset a few customers that you have going down the road as well.
Yep.
So I really drive and talk about with leaders, how you impact the culture of your employees, because your employees are the ones that are going to make the numbers.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And do you want to talk a little bit more, like how would you go around doing that? So like if you're engaging a new client, for example, like what's your process, or how do you kind of go through with them and trying to assess? I guess you start out by trying to figure out what current culture is, or how do you do that?
Yeah, so a few things, right? So first, we need to understand what is the objectives of the business, right? So understanding what they're trying to accomplish is a big piece of that, because at the end of the day, we need to be able to tie this back to something that's tangible, something that's measurable. So I look at all the KPIs and really just understand, okay, what KPIs are we targeting and how are we going to impact those with culture? And then the second piece is really driving into a lot of interviewing, spending a lot of time on the front lines with the people doing the work, as well as spending time with the leadership team in both interview methods as well as observational. How did they respond in certain different situations that I was able to observe? And from there, I take and look at their culture surveys. If they haven't done one of those in a long period of time, we always work on getting one of those set up as well, just to understand, where do you sit? Because you need a benchmark. You need to know where you sit. And then the last piece is, really taking kind of the culmination of all of that and going, okay, so here's where our deficits are at, and how do we build that going forward? And a lot of times that comes down to some really solid leadership training that I developed over the last year here called ACEs. which is really about centered around acknowledging your team. So how to communicate with your team, cultivating your employees or cultivating your team, which is not only training them, but also showing leaders how to effectively goal set for their team as well. So getting out of the stigma that all our goals have to be whatever the company is focused on, and going back to individual goals as well. We get into empowering our team as well. So, you know, once you set them up with all these tools, let them free in the world a little bit, right? So, you know, empower them. And then the last piece, which is just a change on an old school way of thought, right, is celebrate our successes or strengthen our team. So I really focus on, in that celebration, is deep diving into our successes the same way we deep dive into failures. So we talk about learning from failure, right? We learn from failure because when we fail, we tear it apart and we go, why didn't this work? But we don't do the same thing with success. We just go, hooray, we won. And, you know, it's, and we leave it there. And so if we deep dive into those successes the same way, we have the same opportunities to learn. And it flips the script a little bit and tells the story of positivity, which always helps lift everybody up.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. That's great. And I think, I mean, management training is one of my biggest pet peeves, right? I mean, you see so many people, you know, getting promoted into management positions and they're just getting left there. Like, it's like they walk home from work on Friday night, right? And they come in Monday and then suddenly they're supposed to be a manager. And, you know, there's so often there's no support, there's no training, there's no nothing. And, you know, it's such a shame to see businesses where that happens. So.
Oh yeah, I worked in the call center industry, and they are notorious for doing that across the board. Yeah,
I would say I've worked in many industries, and I've not, unfortunately, not seen a lot of places be very good at it. But I've always heard good rumors, and I've actually worked with a couple of people from McDonald's, and they're apparently good. And everyone that I've worked with from McDonald's have been very good. So. There's definitely someone doing it right, but yeah, definitely a big gap. What's typical the size of your customers and like the people you work with?
So I have really kind of two different sectors, right? So small business is one piece of it because I love to support small local businesses. I think they're really the foundation of our economy in anywhere you look. And so I really like to give them the support that they need. I do that locally because here in Southwest Florida, because I can do it for a little bit less cost, you know, makes it more accessible for them. The other side of the business that I like to work with is I like to work with medium, you know, typically medium to large size businesses that have a well-established leadership team. You know, and when I say well-established, I mean, you know, they've got a clear chain of command, and there's a clear direction of who's at the top down to who's at the bottom. So a little bit beyond the small business space, but they don't need to be a huge enterprise, though. I'm not opposed to going there either. But sites anywhere from 50 to 200 people is kind of the space that I spend a lot of time in.
Yeah. Okay. It was just because you said sort of you walk into a company and you look at their KPIs, and I'm like, I see a lot of people who haven't even thought of KPIs yet. So I was just curious with the size of customers you're working with and how frequently they actually have KPIs in place when you walk in. But
well, you know, we walk down that path sometimes when we have to. So you know, sometimes that first conversation is less about how do we fix your culture and more about let's start with the fundamentals of your business. Yeah.
That's why I start with a lot of customers as well, right? So it's very interesting to see how people sometimes people manage to get very, very far in their business life without having some of this stuff, but it's just so interesting to see how people grow and so on without a lot of the sort of fundamental stuff. So.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. What's the biggest management challenge you've ever faced yourself?
The biggest management challenge I ever faced myself. I would say Gosh, it was probably the first leadership position that I ever took. I took over a team of 18 people, and this was a team that I had previously worked on as an employee. And so I had a lot of friends on the team that I kept in very close contact with. And I would say, like that first month was like hugely educational, but also incredibly terrifying for me, because I'm like, now I got to step up and lead all these people that I just been like chummy with, since I've known them for the last 4 years. And so that was always, to me, the biggest challenge walking in was going, how do I lead these people that I already have these relationships, these friend relationships built with, and now I have to hold them accountable and make sure I don't show the biases and all that stuff that comes with being in so-called the friend zone, right? And I think being a young leader, being a new leader at that point, is even more stressful to me, because I didn't, like you pointed out, I didn't have that toolbox already built. I was still learning that toolbox. I was still building that toolbox. I'd been to a couple leadership trainings and conferences, and the information is always great in those things. What always lacks in them, though, is the real world application when you get back and you actually have to do it. And so I learned more in that first month from falling flat on my face than I did in any of those leadership conferences before that. Just by simply going, well, that meeting went terribly. I didn't get anything across that I needed to, and I know what not to do the next time.
Yep. Yeah, totally. I kind of had a little bit different experience myself. So I kind of, I was promoted also internally first, but I'd spent a lot of time learning all the theory and, doing also some management training and stuff. But I had so much theory in my head. And basically what happened was every time I made a mistake, I realized sort of after the event that, here I screwed up, and I knew exactly why I screwed up because I knew the theory of what you're supposed to do. But it was kind of weird looking at myself a lot of the time, because I just ended up like, oh yeah, that was, you were supposed to do this thing instead of that thing, and so on. So that was interesting.
I had an old EMS teacher when I took my basic EMT course. He said there's 3 ways to do everything. He said, there's the book way, there's your boss's way, and then there's the real world application of it. And he said, what you'll find is all 3 of those things are going to be very different.
Yeah, totally. That's good. And I mean, again, that's how most people bump into management and how most people start, right? So that's, I love being able to change that environment for people. What made you actually interested in management in the first place?
So, I'm one of those weird people. Like I'm never content where I'm sitting at. Right. So, for me as an employee, I was, sitting there going, all right, this is cool. I've done this for the last 6 months. I've gained everything that I'm going to gain out of it because I haven't figured out anything new in a month or two. So what's the next step, right? And I just kept on that mindset of what's the next step? How do I grow? How do I grow? How do I grow? I got into a quality position where I had to build out a call quality program for a few platforms that we were supporting in the call center company that I worked for. And, it just kind of got the bug there because I was like, I wasn't totally a manager, but I definitely was managing the full end of a process. And so once I started down that path, it was like, cool, this is what I want to do. And then I, looking back after kind of that, I had that realization and going, gosh, there was just a lot of really terrible leadership that I've experienced based on what I know now. And so that's really what got me interested in it was, I want to change the world in leadership and change the way we're thinking about leadership. And so that was kind of the start of that journey. Though, the full clarity of that journey, I joke with everybody all the time saying, finally in 2019, I figured out what I'm going to do when I grow up. And this last probably 6 months has been the full fruition of what I want to do with it and where I want to go with it. And it's realizing that I don't necessarily want to be a leader unless I'm leading a company. It's more so that I want to teach leaders the right way to approach leadership so that they can be successful. Because I just truly love watching people grow and build their opportunities and their experiences.
Awesome. Yeah, we sound very, very similar. I think both our sort of history and how we think sounds very similar. So that's cool. What you mentioned earlier that you were managing some friends and so on. How did you feel about that? Like you said, it was a bit awkward and so on. But how do you feel about that now? Because I keep getting that question from people that I work with, like sort of clients of different kinds that are always asking like, oh, I have this guy, I know him really well, and what should I do? Should I pretend like we aren't friends anymore? And like all that sort of stuff. How do you look at that today when you get a bit away from it and have some experience? What's your take on it?
So my take is that you can't discount the relationship, right? At the end of the day, I created the friendship. I'm not going to just abandon a friendship. I think a lot of what we do in the professional world is so that we can enjoy our personal life. And so, I always talk to leaders about this, and the conversation is really about how do we set the precedent that they're no different when they're at work, they're no different than anybody else that you're not friends with. And really what that comes down to is two kind of key areas that I focus on. One is objective reviews of their performance, right? So, just like I would objectively review somebody that I'm not friends with, I need to take that same stringent, this is exactly what they're doing, and does it line up with what I need to have done? Yeah. And as long as I can answer yes to that, then great. The second thing I focus on is making sure that as I communicate that I don't show any bias or focus on those people that I'm friends with in the workplace, right? Yeah. Once we're all off the clock, fine, whatever, take it where you want to go with it. But when we're in the workplace, it's strictly, I'm going to have the same conversations with them that I would have with somebody that I just hired a month ago versus somebody that's, that I've never directly worked with up until this point. I'm constantly just making sure I'm fair and consistent with the amount of attention in conversation and relationship building that I would give that person versus somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was, personally, I nearly go in the other end, right? Like I always say that when I know people really well, I tend to just have even higher expectations to them, right? Mm-hmm. And I think most of my friends that have worked with me definitely haven't felt that easy, right? But I think I've definitely managed a lot of people that really struggle, like particularly if they had to be very critical with friends and stuff, right? And what I've always said is that you need to first of all figure out with yourself who you are, right? Like because I totally get that some people is super uncomfortable doing that, and in the end of the day don't want to do it. And I totally totally agree. If that's your type of person, if you don't want to do that, then you definitely need to keep some kind of distance to the people in your team, right? Yeah. But else, as you said, if you do feel that you have the capability to manage it well, then you're like, go ahead. But the one thing I always tell people is expect that if you ever have to fire someone, that you lose the friendship, right? Because I've seen that. I haven't experienced that personally. I've let go of a few people that I still stay in contact with and so on. But I've definitely seen both a lot of clients and a lot of my friends and so on having had to let go of people. And often hired some friend into the company and then having to let go because they're not doing good enough. And I've seen so many times that relationship finishes, right? And I always tell people, like, that can happen. And if you need to make the decision, make it anyway, right? Don't not make the decision because you're afraid of the relationship. Then you're not being a good manager, right?
No, that's exactly right. As I've gotten into leadership and grown into more senior leadership positions, I figured out that I stopped. So many companies give the bonus for if you recommend somebody and they hire them and stay for X period of time. I actually stopped doing that because I didn't want to put myself in a position where I'd have to fire somebody that I personally brought into the company, right? And so I think if you're a line level person, those programs are great for a little incentive to help grow the company. But as you get into leadership, you need to be so cautious in that space because one, anybody you bring in, I feel firmly reflects on your abilities and your and what you bring to the table. And two, if they are a friend and you do have to fire them, I don't want to lose that relationship over a job.
Yeah, totally agree. That totally makes sense. So what's any other sort of challenging business situation? So not necessarily your biggest personal challenge, but biggest challenge from a business perspective that you've had in your business career?
So I think one of the biggest challenges I see very, very consistently is that businesses at the fundamental level don't understand what it takes for them to operate, both financially and people-wise from a day-to-day perspective. I think as you get into large enterprises, they're using a lot of software and a lot of pieces to manage that. But when you're talking the small to medium-sized businesses, I think the visibility, at least in my experience, the visibility in that space is greatly reduced. And so one of my favorite questions to ask as I engage with a new business is, if we stopped doing all client work tomorrow, how much would tomorrow cost you? And very rarely do I actually get an answer. And usually when I get an answer, it's about 40% lower than what it actually costs them once we go down that path. But I see this struggle so often with just this lack of understanding of the fundamental business piece of what does it cost me to operate? If I do no work, what does that cost?
Yeah.
And so, I think that's very foundational information, but I think it's overlooked just too often, and we need to be aware of that, because you need to know at any given time how long can you afford to stay in business without doing work?
Yeah. How long a lifeline do you have?
Yeah.
Really. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. What's so from your personal level, right? This is one of the tough questions for me, but what's personally your biggest weakness from a management standpoint?
So my biggest weakness is by far, actually, I just did a big assessment on myself to really tie some of this stuff together. But I would say openly showing empathy is probably one of my biggest weaknesses. It's something I really have to force myself to do. And what I find a lot of times is when I go push that empathy, not that it sounds fake or not that it is fake, because it's definitely not fake, because that's not a space I play in. But what I find is that I lose interest in their side of the story very quickly. And then, and so it's something that I'm working on, on building myself, and I've made some really good strides over the last year or so here in pushing that. But that's probably my biggest individual challenge right now, and I think that will impact a lot of other smaller challenges that I have as well once I start to really grasp that.
Yep. I can only say that the more we talk, the more and more we sound alike. So I mean, I've found myself so often, having someone in a one-to-one conversation, and they're telling me something sad, and I'm kind of sitting thinking, okay, so what am I going to do after this meeting? And and I found myself like I can definitely talk in a way that makes people feel that I'm interested and that I care, but sometimes I feel like just a horrible human being, because reality is very often it's not that I don't care, but it's, how do you say that? It's difficult to, like, very often people can get upset about things that from my perspective is small, tiny stuff, right?
Yeah.
And particularly when that's the case, I'm like, yeah, okay, you'll survive, kind of thing, whatever. And that's obviously a horrible way to look at the world, but I totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah, no, that's always interesting for me. Like the most awkward, like one-on-one conversations is the crying employee. Like I struggle so hard with that, because I'm like, I know I need to be compassionate here, but
Yeah.
why are we sitting here like sobbing about this at work?
Yeah, that's totally. Okay, that's good. What I mean, one of the things that a lot of my clients struggle a lot with is sort of onboarding new staff when they get them. What's sort of your magical tips and tricks and so on for onboarding new staff members?
So onboarding, I think, is such a critical time in a new employee's journey, and in just any employee's journey, new, old, whatever. When you're onboarding, I think the first really key to success is, it's before they actually step foot in the company officially. It's how is your communication in getting them the critical documents as they move into that role? How is your communication about what to expect on day one? In really building that solid foundation of communication of what to expect in those sort of, I would say really honestly, the first 5 days of their new career or their new position.
Yeah.
Because I think that sets a really solid foundation for them to go, cool, they know what's up, they know what they expect of me, and I know where I'm starting, what path I'm starting down.
Yeah.
Once we get into those first couple of days, I think training is absolutely critical. We have so many businesses that are focused on, cool, I finally hired this new position that I've been looking for, and now go, right? And there's
output.
Yep, go fix it, go do it, and you're like, but how, right? So I think the next piece is really big, is appropriate in connected training to what you're doing. And when I say connected, it's, we hear about training for new employees, and it's, the HR presentation and welcome to the company and things like that. And then it's kind of go off to your desk and here's some SOPs and some stuff, especially as you get into more senior leadership positions. There's less and less, so to speak, training that goes with that. And so I think it's really critical that you spend some time on some of the core foundational training for the company, based around the programs that you're going to be involved with, even some of the people training, right? I think leadership training, or even if it's a truncated 4-hour, here's what we expect of our leaders. Like, I think that's huge, and just building that solid foundation, and then making sure that you have set up in that first week with your downline new hires or your new employees, as a leader of those new employees, making sure you have defined checkpoints set up with them. So at 7 days, or 10 days, 15 days, 30 days, 45 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever makes sense for you and that new employee. But you need to have a defined path and set some goals and expectations that are associated with that defined path. So after your first 5 days, here's what I expect, and this is what we're going to talk about. At 10 days, here's what I expect, and this is what we're going to talk about. At 30 days, and really building out that path.
Yep.
I think that just that in itself, really sets the stage for what a new employee can expect, and really sets the stage for building the culture within your company as well.
Yep.
So often, not even leadership training, just new employees, I've walked in and watched day one of training classes, and it's like they jump in and they're like, hey, okay, welcome to the company. Great to have you here. All right, so this is what we're doing. And they're like hard into teaching them the job, like day one, like by noon, day one, so it's like, and what I see is those companies typically have high attrition in the first 30 to 90 days as well, because companies just feel like employees feel like they just really, been put through the ringer. All right, here we go. And we're gone, and no matter, no more do we matter because we got pushed out of training in 5 days and we're just expected to run.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, when I work corporate, one of the big things that I would always do when people started would actually bring them around and say hello to like the receptionist, and make sure the receptionist know them, make sure they know the bin man and the HR people, and like just actually introducing people and say, oh, this is Bob, he's new, he's working in this place, and so on. Like just so they feel they actually know some people also, not just in the team, but around the company. Because like what inevitably happens is within the first week or so, or 2 weeks or so, very often, someone forget their badge, or someone, they have a problem with parking or whatever. And, when they actually have that little soft introduction in the beginning to someone in reception or whatever, it makes them so much more confident. And the receptionists know them and like, oh yeah, Bob, you're new. I remember I saw you 2 days ago. And it really makes so many things so much easier, right? And it really builds relationship in a very, very different way.
Yeah, no, that's super key. I love the introduction piece, outside of the team. I always take day one. Day one should be your fluff and love day, I call it, right? And so when I've designed training programs, in the past, day one is welcome to the company. It's introductions to key people. So in like the call center world and the BPO world, it would be, introductions to the operations managers, as well as the site director, and any key other leaders in the organization. I always make sure that they stop by on that day one and just put a face and a name out there so that, everybody knows who they are, and then, and then it's, talk about the company, talk about, a little bit about what we're doing, bring that job description to life a little bit.
Yep.
And then towards the end of day one, depending on the nature of the position, it's maybe doing some job shadowing. It's maybe having some critical conversations about different pieces that they may encounter that are, like soft skills type stuff, in customer service, groups. I always do about an hour discussion on what is exceptional customer service, right? And it's something that you don't have to have any prior knowledge to go down that path with, but but it always turns out to be a very, very beneficial conversation that leads into the rest of the customer service training and the rest of the training that goes on later in that week.
Yep, I like it. That's awesome. What about the other big pain point that a lot of clients have, which is delegation? How are you handling delegation?
Yes. Delegation it's such a challenging space, right? Because as leaders, we want to go, we know best and we know how to solve this, so I'm just going to do it. And so I always, I take this back to my leadership model, because that's a big part of the empower pieces of my leadership model, is empowering your team to be successful. And the first question I always ask leaders when I talk about this is, And it sounds hilarious, but it's really this basic: is did anyone die? And it always gets a big chuckle around the room, and everybody's like, "What do you mean? Did anybody die?" I said, "The last time you delegated something to somebody, did anybody die?" And no. Well, exactly. Nobody is dying over the decisions we're making in business. And so once we get past that, that starts to build this mindset that it's okay to let your team make mistakes. And that's where I think a lot of leaders struggle, is because they're like, I want my team to be perfect. And therefore, I know I can do it in a perfect way, or as close to a perfect way as I possibly can. And so instead of delegating out those tasks, they're just, I'm going to just go ahead and do this myself. And that's what it's going to be. So I start with, just this simple, did anyone die? And just making them realize that none of the decisions we make in business are that critical. And if they are that critical, yes, you definitely should involve somebody else with them. But at the end of the day, that should be a conversation between you and that employee to teach them how to make that decision the right way.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if you're working as a doctor in a hospital, things might be slightly different, right?
Of course, yeah. But even at that, right, you have a medical team, in those situations, you have a medical team, right? So what are they doing? They're all talking about what is the best course of action. So, that's really what it's about, is setting up that chain of communication and teaching your team how to make effective decisions. So, and that stems from teaching the basics of risk analysis, right? So understanding what a risk costs, both time, effort, energy, dollars, if that's, in play as well. And then understanding what is the potential gain out of that situation as well. So, just very basic risk analysis steps, but at the end of the day, if we can teach our teams how to do that, then they don't have to get up and ask us, should I go ahead and process this file forward? I'm not sure. It's kind of sitting in a gray area. They know how to critically make that step. And so what happens is you start to see an improvement in the overall production of the team, because they're spending less time trying to chase you down to ask you all these questions. Now they're feeling more empowered to make those decisions and just really get the work done. And so the other key to that is appropriate follow-up, right? So if you know that somebody's made several right decisions, it's time to go call that out. This goes into the strengthening portion of the ACEs, right? And call out and go, hey, you've been doing a really great job, leading these tasks and making the right decisions on them. Just wanted to say thank you for that. And when you encourage that behavior, now they start to make more right decisions. Likewise, if they do have missteps, which is definitely going to happen, we need to step back and have that conversation and kind of do a post-mortem approach to it and go, so you made this decision and here was the impact. Why did you make that decision that way? What could you have done better? What could I have done better as a leader to help you make that decision more effectively? And I think that third question is so critical in that conversation.
That's very, very few leaders ask that question.
But it steps back and says, hey, I'm in it to see you be successful. And that's really, at the end of the day, that's what a leader's all about, is making their team successful.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, that's awesome. That was a really, really great conversation, Adam. Just before we finish up here, any awesome sort of tips, tricks, resources, or the likes that you really want to recommend people?
So tips, tricks, the easiest thing you can do to make a connection with your team is walk around every day and say good morning and thank you. That in itself opens up the bridge of communication and really will change the way your team views you. And then the second piece to that is get out from behind your desk. Whatever you can do to be out with your team, supporting your team on the floor and what they're doing, is going to make you just that much more successful with your team and building those relationships. So those are my big tip takeaways. Look for, I got a book. Oh,
wait a minute. Did you just say we had to talk to our team?
Yeah.
Like that sounds very frightening. No, good. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem. Yeah, no, talking to your team is critical. And just by saying thank you and good morning and, have a great evening, like all those kind of things that we take as being very nominal, if you start to do those on a regular basis, really builds a foundation so that when they have something more critical to come talk to you about, it's less intimidating for them. So that's where I always encourage those simple things. Yeah. And it changes the way your team approaches you. So, so later on this year, I have a book coming out. Working title is How to Build Aces in Your Organization, but it is a full flush out book on my ACEs leadership model that is focused around leadership and culture. Yep. So that's kind of my, I definitely will keep you informed as to when that comes out. I'll be putting that out everywhere that I can possibly get it out. But awesome. Building the foundation to start my climb up the ladder to be the next John Maxwell or Simon Sinek. So
awesome.
That's probably my big takeaway though, is just open up that communication. Look out for my book, because that'll have all kinds of great tips like that and more in it as you learn and go down your path as a leader.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your time today, Adam. It was awesome talking to you.
I appreciate you having me on, and it's always great to share this information with people that are looking to engage.
If people want to get hold of you, what's the best way of doing that?
Best way is send me a message on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn. That's I'm on there probably, at least according to my wife, maybe a little too much, but it's the way we grow things these days. So that is probably by far the best way. And then I'm also on Twitter as well, at Adam Sinkus. Yep. And so those are probably, I would say, probably the two best ways to see my content and get a hold of me.
Perfect, Adam. I'll link to that in the show notes. Thank you very much for joining, and have a great day.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Please leave a review. It means the world to us. You can also learn more about management at madsingers.com.